All right, welcome to Building Cues. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how do we methodically instruct our students so that they can find success in a safe and aligned way. So we'll look at things like setup, how do you set the pose up? Execution, how do you move into the pose? Deepening cues, what do they do and what do they feel? And then motivational cues. So that's when you're really working them hard and you don't want them to poop out just yet. So let's take a look at what those different cues look like. So setting up the poses, there's a kind of two parts to this. We're going to look first at grounding points. We went over this with our different individual pose modules that looked at the seated, supine poses, and then also our different standing poses. So thinking about how do we get our students to ground. But even before that, thinking about the direction. How do we cue for that safety? How do we set them up for success? So this is kind of a method to think of whenever you're getting into poses. So as we start progressing a little bit more in through this training, I ask that you think about this methodology and progression of cueing when you get into your own poses. So we generally start from the ground up. So if we're looking at our standing poses, we would think about the feet and then moving up into the ankles, the knees, the hips. So all of those building types of joints as we work all the way up to the top of the head. So let's take a look at what some of those cues might look like in many of the poses that we've already looked at. So we will start off with a fairly familiar pose, Warrior Two. So let's think about that setup. What direction? Where are we grounding? We're grounding through the feet. So let's set them up for the direction of the feet. Well, we want the feet to be wide, and we want for one of the feet to turn 90 degrees out while the other foot stays positioned, pointed in front. So now we have our direction. We can talk a little bit about where are they going to be grounding. Maybe the back edge of that back foot, root through the big toe of the front foot or the base of the big toe. Now we can start thinking about the next joints up, the knees. Well, this one's going to stay micro bend, but this front leg is going to bend. How far? To the knee hovers over the ankle. Moving up to the hips. What do we want? We want the hips. We're not squaring towards that front leg. We're opening up. So the hips are open here. Moving up, shoulders above the hips. Arms out to the side. Head looking over that front hand. Good. So try it on yourself. Let's just go through Warrior Two. Think about first thing. Feet are wide. Turn that foot out 90 degrees. Soft bend in the back leg. Bend 90 degrees. Or until that knee hovers over the ankle. Hips are open. Shoulders over the hips, arms extended out to the side. Eyes looking over that front hand. Good, so start thinking about this a little bit. We're going to get into Anjaneyasana. So this is our low lunge. So we'll come down to our knees and we'll just step 1 foot forward. So think about your grounding here. We're going to ground through the knee of the back leg, pressing into the foot of the front leg, rooting through the base of the big toe and the heel, so the whole foot is connected. Moving up to the knee. So we're going to press this knee into the ground. The other knee bends so that it hovers in line over the ankle and in the same direction as those toes are pointed. Moving up to the hips. We want the hips square to the front, so the hips are facing that front knee. Shoulders are going to stay above the hips. Arms will reach up overhead. Eyes are looking forward. So let's go through that. Switching to the other side. Think about how you will cue. What direction is everything moving? Where are you grounding? Begin to shift all of those joints up through the top of the head. Anjaneyasana. Good. Next, Janu Shirshasana. So we're going to take it to a seated pose, different grounding point here. So let's start with, what are we grounding with? We're going to ground with our sit bones. So press in with those sit bones. What's going on below the body? We don't want the legs just to, be hanging out here. So we're rooting through. We're going to cue that. Press into the sit bones. We want to make sure that the pelvis is tilted correctly. So remember, lifting up on a block or a blanket. Some places have blankets available. So whatever we can do to tilt the pelvis so those sit bones press straight down. And we're going to think about the legs. Oh, we're going to engage the quads. We're going to pull the toes up so the toes are pointed up towards the ceiling. Feet are flexed. Now we'll move up from the ground. Belly draws back towards the spine. Arms lift up. And we're going to hinge forward. Oh, I'm sorry. We are doing Janu Shirshasana. So let's go back to our legs. So everything is true for that extended leg. The bent knee is going to press into the thigh of that extended leg. That thigh is going to press back. So we've got activation happening in the lower body. Lifting up. Now arms lift up, hinging forward, either grabbing the shin, the ankle, the big toe, or the foot. Chest stays lifted. And we're reaching the belly towards the thigh. So let's take it to the other side. Thinking about rooting first. How do you cue that? What's going on below that rooting point? Get that lower body set up. What direction are the toes pointed? What are the legs doing? What's kind of the activation here? Then rooting up, lengthening the spine and hinging forward. Chest stays lifted. Chest is reaching towards the toes, stretching through the back of the leg. Right. Let's do supine spinal twist. So this is a supine pose. We'll be on our back. So we can cue, what are the grounding points here? mainly shoulders. And since we're not in an inversion where the lower body is lifted, our sacrum is also going to be engaged, maybe that lower back. What's happening below the grounding point with the legs? We have one leg extending. The other leg is going to be bent, knee towards the sky. We will roll over onto our side so that the knee can find the ground. Can always use a block or a blanket as well. But this hip is going to come up. Then we go back. Now we're in execution. So now we're going to go back to reaching the shoulder and finding that twist. So I've seen two ways people like to do this. Some people like to anchor the shoulders and then let the knee hover. Other people like to have the knee anchored and let the shoulder work its way to the ground. So let's go back, switching side. Think about, how do you cue? If someone was listening to you, they're lying on their back, they can't see what you're doing, how are you going to tell them what to do with their body? Grounding, what's happening with the lower body. Move into execution. Taking that knee over and then reaching the opposite shoulder back towards the ground. And coming back. I want to go down one more pose. It's a pretty common pose. I think everybody who teaches yoga will be teaching this pose, downward facing dog. Adho Mukha Svanasana. So we'll start in our tabletop. Turn the toes over. So we can root. We have 4 grounding points here. The hands, once we put them down, they're going to be there, right? They're going to stay. So let's tell people what's happening in the hands. Where are they putting their weight? Up towards the base of the fingers. Grip with the fingertips. Heel of the hand is light. That's a big issue. People will jam into their wrists and then you'll see this, like they spend too much time. So give that cue from the very beginning. It's going to make those forearms work. Soft bend in the elbows. Shoulders drop away from the ears. So I've cued my upper body, these 2 grounding points. Now I will turn my toes over, curl them under, lift my knees. Feet are hip width apart. Push back with the sit bones. The hips reach back as if you were trying to press to the wall behind you. Knees, keep a nice bend in the knees, especially that first time in here. And let the hips come back and see if you can get your sit bones to start peeking up towards the sky. Chest reaches towards the thighs. And drop down. One little point to remember with downward dog, when we have 4 limbs that we are cueing. Cue the upper body. Start to cue the legs and know that whatever you said about the upper body has probably started to leave their awareness. Take them back into that. Check in with your hands. Where's your weight? So those are some things to keep in mind. Feel it in your own body. Notice where your tendencies are. That's the greatest way to explore how to give information to your students, is to be aware of what you tend to do and how you need to correct in your own practice. All right. All right, let's take a look at the next step. After we've got them set up, after we've got them into execution, how do we help our students deepen into their poses? All right, deepening cues. This is what helps our students grow in their own practice to get deeper, to release tightnesses in their bodies and start to have a deeper communication. So how do we do that? These are our action cues. We say, do this in order to achieve this. So it would include things like draw your inner thighs towards each other to stabilize your feet, or squeeze your thighs to square your hips. Brace your abdominals to support your lower back. Turn the thigh outward to bring the knee in line with the foot. So oftentimes this will actually answer some of the questions that your students are having, because most of the time when they're confused about a pose, they're just you're gonna see it all over their face, but they're not gonna necessarily ask you why. So getting used to offering these poses, get your students into the safety part through execution, setup, and then start teaching them how to go deeper. So let's take a look at some of the poses and how we can cue those. Action cues. Students love this information. So think about this. In every pose that you practice, think of an action cue, a deepening cue that you can offer. What are the things that you're doing in your own body to create that deeper pose? Let's start off with crescent. So setting it up, we'll take 1 foot forward, 1 foot back. Feet are hip width apart. Toes are pointed forward. Front knee is going to bend so that knee hovers over the ankle, and the back foot is going to lift the heel. So we're rooting through the balls of the feet and both of our legs. Hips are squared, shoulders over top of the hips, arms up above, pinkies spin towards each other. All right, deepening cue. Draw your inner thighs towards each other to help square the hips. That's a big one. Drop the shoulders away from the ears to help lift the heart. Brace through the core to support the lower back. What else can you think of? Try it out on the other side, going through all of those steps. Feet hip width apart. Rooting, how are you grounding? Now we'll go to execution. Next joint up, knee, ankle, hips. Now we can start threading this in. So once we've gotten them here, we can build up from here. So we could say, bend that front knee, knee over the ankle. Draw the inner thighs together to square those hips. Brace the core, support that lower back. Lift the arms up, spin the pinkies, draw the shoulder blades back and down to lift the heart. All right. What's next? Let's go back to our Anjaneyasana. I'm going to grab some blocks. These are always good props to have around. And I wanted to cue a little bit about safety here. So I'm going to get into my Anjaneyasana, into my low lunge. Sometimes people will bring the fingertips down and then they go like this, or they drop their belly and they hyperextend in the lower back. So we can take our blocks to help lift, extend through the arms, roll the shoulder blades back to keep the heart lifted. Deepening Q. Squeeze through the glutes to stretch deeper into those hip flexors. Ooh. Raise through the core to protect the lower back. Great, so let's just switch around here. So we're going to go into a low lunge or a runner's lunge, a runner's stretch. Set up, hip width apart, foot, knee, engaging, and then we're going to start execution. Hip starts to stretch down. We want to think about safety. So what do we want? Let's go back first. That'll be the first thing people will start to do. So brace the core, protect the lower back. Roll the shoulders back to lift the heart. Now squeeze into the glutes to help lengthen and stretch through the hip flexor. All right. Next, seated twist. This one's fun. So we're going to start off with our rooting here. With the seated twist, we're going to have our legs kind of wrapping around. So that's going to be part of my execution. So the first thing is, let's root through the sit bones. Okay. Both sit bones, feet are in front, chest is lifted, spine is tall. Execution. Take that left heel, bring it over to the right buttock. Reset back into that grounding. Other leg hops up and over if possible. Root back into both sit bones. If you're stuck with one sit bone up, bring that foot over to the shin. Most important here, root through the sit bones to grow tall in the spine. Top of the head reaching towards the ceiling. So pressing through those sit bones to engage a deeper stretch into the hip. Now we can take the opposite arm to hug that top leg. Root through the sit bones. Top of the head reaches to the sky. So just notice every time you remind yourself to root back into the sit bones, what is that doing to the sensation? Sometimes I use my deepening cues to even just bring awareness or to let someone know. Sometimes you could just tell them what you're feeling. Press those sit bones in, lift that chest. Oh, I feel a lot of stretching sensation over here in my right hip. Is everybody else feeling that? Sometimes you'll have someone who is like, oh, I'm not feeling it. Maybe they're still kind of stuck with that hip still up. Taking it to the next step, reach that opposite arm back around and find that twist. Press through the sit bones. So now we've created a spinal twist. Draw the belly button back towards the spine in order to deepen into that twist on your next exhale. All right, let's try it on the other side. So again, think about your rooting cues. What would you be telling your students here? Take the first foot and then root back in again. Take the next foot up and over, or whatever position allows those sit bones to be rooted into the ground. Press them down as if you were trying to push yourself up off of a chair. You can wrap that opposite arm around, pull that knee to the lifted chest. Don't pull the chest over into the knee. And find that twist. Drive those sit bones into the ground to lengthen through the spine. Draw the belly button back towards the spine to deepen into that twist. And release. One more I want to go over. We're going to go through a side plank, and I'm going to modify it so it'll be more like a knee plank. So we'll start off with the grounding points, the knee and the foot. The foot, toes pointed forward, foot is flat and pressing in. Knee is driving through the center of the earth, arms out to the side, and we're going to drop that far arm and lift the opposite arm above. So we're stacking the shoulders here. Pull the shoulder blades together to open the heart. Engage into the glutes to pull the hip forward and in line with the rest of the body. Let's try that on the other side. Again, if someone had their eyes closed and you wanted to get them into this position, starting from your knees, tell them what to do. Right foot reaches out, toes pointed forward, foot pressing into the ground. The thigh of the bent leg is straight up and down. Arms reach out to the side. The left hand comes down to the side and the right arm reaches up so that the shoulders are stacking above each other. Squeeze the glutes to pull the hips forward in alignment with the rest of the body. Maybe even think about sensation here then. This is another great one to deepen into the cues. Tell people what you're feeling. I feel such a great stretch here. Lengthening. A nice lifting sensation at the lower end. We want to avoid compression, crunching down in one side. This is all about lifting and expanding. All right. So last thing we're going to get into is motivational cueing. So this is when you're having your students holding difficult positions, especially when you start seeing them falling out of the position, taking lots of breaks, flows. So when you start to see maybe heavier breathing, maybe technique is starting to lessen as you're getting through a strong heat generating flow. How do we keep them going and engaged for the practice? If they don't stay engaged, they don't necessarily get to feel that sense of breaking through that tapas, the heat that we talked about. So how do we encourage them and motivate them to stay with it? Okay, so why do we use motivational cues? We use these to help our students maintain focus on the technique. We use it to challenge those self-defeating thoughts, those I can't do this, my balance sucks today, motivating them past that. And ultimately, this helps our students deepen in their own practice. So for example, Warrior 3. Let's take a look at Warrior 3 and how we may want to keep someone with that if we're holding that position for a while. Okay, so Warrior 3, our peak pose we're working on, and we have our students up in their Warrior 3. And they've been there for a while, and you're seeing this, they're falling over. You're starting to see them grabbing their water and things like that. So we get them into the pose. Okay, let's all come back together and let's lift that back leg, pull the toes towards the ground, reach those arms out forward, pull the belly button back towards the spine, draw the inner thighs towards each other to help square that hip. All right, we're going to hold this for 3 more breaths. Inhale, press out with the back leg. Exhale, root through that standing leg. Inhale, extend those fingers out. Exhale, lift that chest, feel the shoulders dropping. Last one, inhale, lengthen through, fingertips to foot. Exhale, gently bring yourself up. So giving them something to think about, occupy their mind, helps them stay with the technique. So let's look at some other things about motivational cues. Okay, as we discussed, when do we use these? We use these cueing methods when we want our members to be holding challenging poses, just like in our Warrior 3, moving through those strenuous flows, or attempting new types of poses, even like those balance poses. So let's take a look at what some of those might look like. How do we help students maintain their focus on a particular pose? Bringing those deepening cues in and maybe adding some acknowledgement. If you're feeling fatigued, you might notice this. Add your deepening cue. Do this to engage this. Letting them know relaxation is coming. Countdown breaths or beats of music. So let's take a look at how this might look in chair pose. Okay, fiery in about halfway through our practice. Muscles are getting warm, starting to fatigue a little bit. We're going to challenge our students by getting them into Utkatasana, chair pose. So let's think about all those different cues. So feet hip width apart. Okay, think about how you're rooting. The entire foot is rooting. So we're not just going to rock back on the heels. We're going to keep the balls of the feet as we bend through the knees and pull the hips back, almost like we're trying to sit in a little tiny chair. Lift the heart up. So we're going to tuck the tail, drawing that pubic bone up towards the sternum. Arms lift up. And we're going to hold them here for a while. You'll start to hear some out in the floor, and we want to keep them there. So inhale, lift that heart. Exhale, take it a little bit deeper. Okay, we're going to stay here for 3 more breaths. If you're feeling fatigued, start to draw those inner thighs towards each other. Feel how that lifts your heart up. Exhale, a little bit deeper. Last one. Inhale, open up to the sky, and exhale, stand up into the forward fold. Nicely done. Okay, moving through strenuous flows. Thinking about what happens if people are going through something that's really challenging to them and they don't know when it's going to end. So during those long flow progressions, say things like, stay with me, we can do this. Sprinkle moments of rest throughout. Drop them into a child's pose when they're in their downward dog. Give them a breath or two and then bring them back up. Give people permission for what they need to do, but also remind them they're here to challenge themselves. So let's take a look at a sun salutation flow. Okay, so let's say that we have gone through all the basics of the moves and we're in the middle of a flow, and maybe we're at the third or fourth sun salutation. So maybe we're coming up out of the third one. Okay, so halfway lift, deep fold, reverse swan dive up, and mountain pose. Last one, here we go. Keep that strong technique. Inhale, reach up. Engage through the legs as you hinge forward. Halfway lift. Take it back to your downward facing dog. Inhale forward, upward facing dog. Exhale back to your downward facing dog. Great, let's drop to our knees. Sink back into a child's pose. Give yourself a nice deep inhale and exhale. And then rise back up, pressing into that downward facing dog. Look in between the hands. And step or hop forward. Halfway lift. Deep fold. Reverse swan dive up. And exhale. Strong, engaged, mountain pose. All right, let's take a look at those new challenging poses that you may bring to your students. All right, attempting new types of poses. These don't necessarily have to be balance poses either. They can just be poses that are super challenging to the joints. Maybe getting the bodies to open up. I think our Hanumanasana or any of those standing balance poses. So some of the things we can do, remind your students, this is where the real progress begins. You know, sometimes when we start to feel a little discouraged, our mind will start going to, I've got to do this, I got to go do this thing. So reminding them, why are they here? This is it. This is that cresting challenge that you came for today. Let's step up to the challenge. Acknowledge the difficulty. This is an advanced move we're doing here. And give modifications and options. So let's take a look at what that might look like. Dancer pose. This one's a doozy. So perhaps I've spent most of my class, we worked on strengthening through the back of the leg in our warrior 3. We worked on maybe stretching through low lunges, maybe even finding that lizard pose to be able to get into stretching through the front of the legs, and maybe working a lot in my boat pose to engage through the core so I can make sure that we're protecting our lower back as we move into dancer pose, a one-legged balance that also includes a back bend. So I'll have my students take a flamingo and then turn their hand around keeping the hips squared and reaching back with that back leg. So what do we want here? We want the leg to reach straight back. Everything's on the sagittal plane. And then the foot presses into the hand without compressing the lower back. So as people are getting into this, we offer them some modifications. If it's a little too much to try to hold on to your foot with your hand, try practicing with holding on a strap. In most classrooms, there's at least some wall space to be able to help your students be able to keep the hips squared. Oftentimes, this is what we get. We don't want that. If you have a chair available, you can use that. Sometimes equipment, racks, weight racks, people can hold on to those. So giving those different options. And then talking about all of the things that they did. So I mentioned we worked on that warrior 3. So we've worked into that back leg muscle. We've worked into stretching and keeping the core engaged so that we can keep our lower back healthy as we move into our dancer pose. The last thing I want to go over is considerations for how to give motivational cues. Highlight what is correct rather than focusing on what needs to improve. We want to make sure that when we are offering any kind of correction, that we don't leave our students feeling frustrated or having a sense of like, I can't do this right. You know, every time the instructor looks at me, they're telling me what I'm doing wrong. So how do we frame that? So let's take a look at how that might look in a class. Okay, let's say we have our students getting into their triangle pose. So we have them in, you have a couple of students who are using their blocks. I love seeing those blocks out there being utilized. That's our tools, the extension of our hands to help us deepen into the pose. So now we've highlighted anybody who's doing that. And anybody who is over here like this might go, oh, I'll grab my block. Help them find some achievement. How about in the pose, noticing that those shoulder blades are stacked up in a few of your students. So you're walking through your room, you're offering some assistance and just making the comment, I love seeing these shoulders stacked so beautifully. It helps bring that awareness into it. Another thing to do is maybe picking someone out of your class. Don't pick the same person all the time. But if you get to know your students' names and being able to highlight, so maybe you have somebody who way down low. So ideally in warrior pose, we should be able to place a cup on that front thigh with the knee over the ankle. So you have somebody here and walking around and saying, Jenny, oh, what a nice deep and low to the ground warrior pose. Way to get into the power of this pose. All right. So now that we've looked at the different cues, how do we keep them safe? How do we keep them informed and deepening in their practice? And how do we keep them motivated to keep working to get deeper? So I'd like for you to utilize your classes that you're taking for this course. I want you to listen to the cueing that the instructors are giving during those classes. I want you to start thinking about what are those cues? Where do they fit? Is that a setup, an execution? Is that a deepening cue? Was that a motivating cue? What were your favorite ones? Keep those in mind. Most of my cues I've heard from somebody else, and I really liked it. It really meant something to me. And so a lot of my teaching experience is a mixed pot of all the great instructors that I've had throughout my practice experience. So write those down, bring those to the group meet so we can share and expand our own vocabularies. Looking forward to seeing you there, getting closer.